Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. This is a story I haven't told anyone in years. My friends still pretend it never happened, but I hear it sometimes. That bell, even now. It's not a memory. It's a sound, clear and sharp as broken glass, that rings in the silence of my apartment or the space between heartbeats. It's the sound that started it all. We were Oregon College sophomores, fueled by cheap beer and the arrogant belief that our youth made us invincible. Our immunity was boredom, and the only cure was breaking into places that had been forgotten by the world. Myself, Eli, Marcus, and Jonah. We were a unit. Eli was our leader, all charisma and reckless confidence. Marcus was the skeptic, the one who always had a logical explanation. Jonah was the heart, the one who felt everything too deeply. And I was the chronicler, the one holding the camera, trying to capture the ghosts we were so desperate to find. We'd already done the usual spots that fall, the skeleton of the old textile mill with its rusted looms like dinosaur bones, the asbestos-lined state asylum, where the wind sounded like screaming. We were chasing a bigger thrill. "This is it," Eli said, his breath pluming in the cold October air as he slammed his car door. He shone his flashlight beam up at the hulking silhouette before us. West Haven High, the crown jewel of Portland's abandoned crap. The school was a 2-story brick monument to decay, squatting behind a chain-link fence choked with ivy. The moon, pale and full, cast a sickly light on the shattered windows, their broken teeth grinning into the night. Graffiti scrawled its modern hieroglyphics across the brickwork, and the air smelled of wet leaves, rot, and the faint, sweet tang of spray paint. "You sure about this, man?" Jonah asked, his voice a little too high. "I read online that a kid just vanished here, like in the 80s. They never found him." 1986, Marcus corrected, ever the fact-checker. His name was Thomas Wells, and he didn't vanish. He was probably a runaway. This whole cursed school thing is just internet garbage. It's brick and mortar, Jonah. It can't hurt you. Unless a floorboard gives way and you fall through into a nest of rats, I added, hefting my camera. "Let's just get this done. I'm freezing." Eli found a section of fence that had been peeled back by previous explorers, and we slipped through one by one. Our footsteps crunched on a carpet of broken glass and dead leaves in the courtyard. The main doors were boarded, but a side entrance near the gymnasium was accessible through a window with a missing pane. Eli went first, then Jonah, then me. Marcus hesitated for a second, scanning the dark, empty playing fields behind us before following. Inside, the silence was a physical presence. It was heavier than the silence of the mill or the asylum. This was a silence that had once been filled with slamming lockers, shuffling feet, and the low hum of hundreds of adolescent lives. Now, it was a vacuum. Our flashlight beams cut through the gloom, illuminating a long hallway of rusted, half-open lockers, their doors hanging like slack jaws. Faded posters for a long-forgotten pep rally curled away from the walls. Everything was coated in a fine gray dust. "Check it out," Eli whispered, his voice echoing unnaturally. He pushed open a classroom door. Desks were still arranged in neat rows, as if waiting for students who never came. A skeleton of a computer sat on the teacher's desk, and a single weathered textbook lay open on the floor, its pages swollen with moisture. We moved deeper into the building, a tight, nervous knot of light and sound. We joked, our laughter too loud, trying to fill the oppressive quiet. We mocked the outdated decor, the peeling paint, the water-stained ceiling tiles. We were convincing ourselves we were in control. That's when we heard it. It was faint, but unmistakable. A clear, metallic burn that echoed down the hallway. A school bell. We all froze. The sound hung in the air for a moment, then faded, leaving a ringing in my ears. "What the hell was that?" Jonah breathed. "Wind," Marcus said immediately, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "A loose pipe, metal contracting in the cold. It's an old building." "Sounded like a bell," Eli said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "This is awesome." We stood there for a full minute, listening. The building was silent again. "See, nothing," Marcus said, clapping Jonah on the shoulder. "Just the house settling. Let's check out the auditorium." We laughed it off then, a nervous, jittery sound that was more relief than humor. We pushed the fear down, buried it under bravado and the thrill of the exploration. We were young and stupid, masters of a dead kingdom. But looking back now, that was the last moment anything about that night felt normal. That bell wasn't a greeting or a warning. It was a starting pistol, and we were already running the race, unaware that the finish line had been dismantled years ago. The bell's echo faded, but the silence it left behind was different now. It was a watchful silence. The jokes stopped. Our footsteps, which had been loud and careless, became cautious, deliberate placements of our feet to avoid the loudest cracks in the linoleum. The initial thrill was curdling into something else. "This place is a gold mine," Eli said, his voice low, pulling a can of spray paint from his backpack with a sharp, rattling sound. "Marcus, you're with me. We're gonna leave our mark in the main hall. Noah, you and Jonah see what's upstairs. See if you can find the principal's office or something." I nodded, relieved to be moving, to be doing something. Splitting up felt like a bad idea in a horror movie, but in the moment, it felt proactive. Marcus looked less convinced, his eyes darting down the dark, locker-lined hallway. "You sure that's smart?" he muttered. But Eli was already shaking the can, the ball bearing inside, clattering like a rattlesnake's warning. Jonah and I left them to their vandalism and found a wide staircase, its once bright blue carpet now faded to a murky gray, stained with decades of water and dirt. The air grew colder as we ascended. The second floor was a mirror of the first, but darker, the moonlit windows fewer and farther between. Classrooms stood with their doors agape, revealing frozen tableaus of abandonment. We passed a door labeled library. It was locked. Next to it was a smaller, unmarked door that gave way when Jonah pushed it. Inside was a storage closet, smelling of old paper and mildew. Boxes were stacked to the ceiling. "Bingo," Jonah whispered, shining his light on a box that had split open. Inside were yearbooks, their covers a dated maroon and gold. He pulled one out. West Haven Wolverines, 1986. My blood ran cold. 1986, the year Thomas Wells disappeared. Jonah opened it. The first page was a faculty photo. Someone had taken a blade or a key and violently scratched out every single face, leaving behind a galaxy of shredded paper and gouged ink. Page after page was the same. Cheerleaders, football players, drama club, all faceless. It was an act of meticulous, furious erasure. Then, on the junior class page, we found the exception. One photo was untouched. A boy with dark, serious eyes and a slight, uncomfortable smile. The name below read, Mark Hanlon. "Why is he the only one?" Jonah breathed. I didn't know, but a profound, irrational dread washed over me. A cold nausea that had nothing to do with the dust. I didn't want to touch it. "Put it back, Jonah." He ignored me, staring at Mark Hanlon's face. "You think he knew something?" Before I could answer, a sound erupted from downstairs. Not a single bell, but a rapid metallic bang, 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 rhythmic and aggressive. It sounded exactly like someone running down the hall, slamming every locker door shut. We froze, our lights pointed at the door. Then, from a dusty intercom speaker mounted in the hallway ceiling, a voice crackled to life. It was thin, distorted, and utterly empty of emotion. "Students, please return to your rooms." The voice didn't sound recorded. It sounded present. We stumbled out of the storage room and back to the staircase, calling for Eli and Marcus. They came running from the main hall, their faces pale. Eli's hands were clean. He hadn't sprayed a thing. "What the hell was that?" Marcus demanded, his voice trembling. "The lockers. And that voice. Intercom must be on some backup system," Eli said. But he didn't believe it. None of us did. "Someone's still here," Marcus whispered, his eyes wide. "I'm telling you, this isn't right." We stuck together after that, a tight, nervous herd. We decided to check the source of the tapping Eli had mentioned earlier, a locked classroom at the end of the second-floor hall. As we approached, the sound came again, a soft, insistent tap, tap, tap from behind the door. "Hello?" Eli called, his voice cracking. The tapping stopped. In its place, we all heard it. The faint but unmistakable sound of someone breathing on the other side of the door. Short, shallow, anxious breaths. Eli tried the handle, locked. He put his shoulder to the door, but it didn't budge. "Who's in there?" Jonah called, his voice shrill. The breathing stopped. Total silence. A new kind of fear took hold. Not of ghosts, but of a person. A real, breathing threat hiding in the dark with us. We backed away from the door, our lights fixed on it, half expecting it to burst open. In our retreat, we stumbled into a janitor's closet. It was a small, foul-smelling space filled with broken mops and dried-out chemical bottles. On a rusty hook hung a heavy steel ring with a dozen old keys. My flashlight beam traveled over them. Most were unmarked, but one, longer and more skeletal than the others, had a tag tied to it with fraying string. The writing was faded, but legible. Basement access. Before anyone could speak, the lights flickered. Not the flashlights. The lights, the ancient, dead fluorescent tubes in the hallway ceiling above us stuttered, buzzing to life for a split second, casting the grim hallway in a sickly, pulsating glow before dying again. We all looked up, stunned. There was no power. There couldn't be. Then, from the floor above us, the third floor we hadn't even ventured to, Eli screamed. It wasn't a yell of surprise. It was a short, sharp, full-throated shriek of pure, unadulterated terror. It was cut off almost instantly, as if a switch had been flipped. Then, silence. A silence more absolute and horrifying than any we had heard yet. The silence that followed Eli's scream was a living thing. It pressed in on us, thick and suffocating, broken only by the ragged, panicked sound of our own breathing. For a full 10 seconds, none of us moved, our brains refusing to process what we'd heard. Eli, Marcus's voice was a cracked whisper. No answer. Eli, Jonah shrieked, the sound tearing through the oppressive quiet. We scrambled up the stairs to the third floor, our flashlights jerking wildly, creating a strobe effect of terror. The hallway was empty. Classroom doors stood open, revealing nothing but darkness. There was no sign of a struggle. No sign of him at all. Call his phone, I yelled, fumbling for my own. No service. Of course there was no service. But Jonah, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold his device, stared at his screen. I've got one bar, just one. He'd pulled up a friend tracking app we used when hiking. A single pulsing dot appeared on the map. It wasn't on the third floor. It was directly below us, in the basement. The basement. The key felt like a block of ice in my pocket. We hurtled back down the stairs, no longer caring about noise. Our only thought was getting to Eli. The door to the basement was where we'd left it, a solid, dark slab of wood. I jammed the skeletal key into the lock. It turned with a heavy, grinding shriek that echoed in the hallway. The door swung inward, releasing a wave of air so cold it made our lungs ache. The smell was worse than the cold, a thick, wet odor of black mold and something else, something coppery and sharp. Like old blood, the stairs were concrete, descending into a darkness our flashlights couldn't fully penetrate. Eli, Marcus called down, his voice swallowed by the void. We descended, the temperature dropping with every step. The basement was a labyrinth of crumbling brick walls and support pillars, a forest of shadows. Pipes dripped a steady rhythmic beat. And then we saw it. Pinned to a damp brick wall with rusted nails were the photographs. Not the originals, but laser-printed copies. Every single scratched-out face from the 1986 yearbook. But these weren't faded. They were crisp and new. And scrawled beneath each one in fresh red marker was today's date. My blood turned to slush. This wasn't a decades-old haunting. This was happening now. For us. His camera, Jonah whispered, pointing his beam at the floor. There it was, Eli's expensive vlogging camera, lying on the concrete as if dropped. The little red recording light was still on. I picked it up, my hand trembling, and looked at the playback screen. It wasn't showing a scene from the basement. It was just static. A frantic, gray hiss, like a TV tuned to a dead channel. From the darkness behind a nearby pillar, a voice spoke. It was dry and rasping. The voice of a man who hadn't spoken in a very long time. You're late for detention. We didn't wait to see what it was. A primal, unanimous instinct seized us. We ran. We plunged back into the maze of the basement, our flashlights bouncing, our breaths coming in ragged, sobbing gasps. The shadows around us seemed to congeal, to move. I could hear it behind us, not footsteps, but a soft, shuffling drag, keeping pace, never falling behind, never getting closer. It was hurting us. We found another set of stairs, crashed up them, and burst out through a door into the main floor, not far from the entrance we'd used. We didn't stop. We smashed through the window, glass tearing at our clothes, and fell onto the wet grass outside, scrambling, running for the car, for the world, for light. As I fumbled for the car keys, a final, compulsive dread made me turn and look back at the school. He was standing in the broken window we'd just fled through. Eli. He wasn't struggling. He wasn't scared. He stood perfectly still, a blank, placid smile on his face that was utterly unlike him. And beside him, a tall, gaunt figure in a faded janitor's uniform stood with a hand on his shoulder. I couldn't see the man's face, only the dark outline of his cap against the deeper dark of the school. Then they were gone. The police were polite, thorough, and utterly useless. They found no one in the school, no pinned photos, no camera. They suggested Eli had likely run off, maybe as a prank that had gone too far. They took our statements and left us in a waiting room with our own terror. Eli was never seen again. Weeks later, as I was trying to piece my life back together, a small, stiff envelope arrived in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single square Polaroid photograph. It was us. Me, Marcus, and Jonah, standing in the main hallway of West Haven High, our faces pale and terrified in the glow of our own flashlights. It was taken from behind us, just moments before we heard the first bell, and standing just behind our group, slightly out of focus, was a fifth figure. A tall man in a janitor's uniform, holding a push broom, his head tilted as if observing his new students. I dropped the photo like it was on fire. We never spoke of it again. Marcus and Jonah transferred schools. I finished my degree in a constant state of jumpy paranoia. Sometimes at night, I still dream of that hallway. I feel the cold, I smell the mold, and I see those locker doors stretching into infinity. And I swear, just before I jolt awake, sweating and gasping, the bell rings. Not in the dream, in my room, clear as day, sharp as broken glass. A final, mocking reminder that detention is never really over. The rain had been falling for hours. A steady, hypnotic drumming against the roof of her Dallas duplex that was both soothing and isolating. Inside, the world was reduced to the warm pool of light from her desk lamp, the soft scratch of her red pen, and the towering, daunting stack of 7th-grade essays on To Kill a Mockingbird. Claire, 34, sighed and rubbed her eyes. The digital clock on her laptop read 11:37 p.m. This was her life now. Late nights, endless grading, and the profound silence of a house that felt too big for just two people. Down the hall, she could hear the soft, rhythmic breathing of her 6-year-old daughter, Hannah, asleep in her bed, adorned with glow-in-the-dark stars. That sound was her anchor, the only thing that made the loneliness bearable. The divorce had finalized 3 months ago, and the duplex, with its beige walls and faint smell of the previous tenant's lavender plug-ins, was supposed to be a fresh start. Most nights, it just felt empty. A sharp, unexpected knock at the front door made her jump, her pen skidding across an essay about Boo Radley. Her heart hammered. No one visited this late. She crept to the door, standing on her toes to peer through the peephole. A man stood on her welcome mat, hunched against the rain. He was young, maybe mid-20s, wearing a dark hoodie pulled up against the weather. He held a small cardboard tray with a single paper cup. Claire unlocked the deadbolt, but left the chain on, cracking the door open just an inch. The humid night air rushed in. "Yes?" "Delivery from Urban Grind," the man said, his voice cheerful but flat. He held up the cup. "For Claire." She frowned. "I didn't order anything." "It's a gift," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. It was a pleasant enough smile, but it held a fraction of a second too long. "From your coworker, Ms. Allen. Said you'd be upgrading papers." A cold trickle of unease traced its way down Claire's spine. She taught at John F. Kennedy Middle School. There was no Ms. Allen on staff. Not this year, not last year. "There must be a mistake," she said, her voice tighter now. "I don't know a Ms. Allen." The man's smile didn't falter. He simply pushed the tray a little closer to the crack in the door. "She was very specific. Said you'd need the caffeine." Something was wrong. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, and they were fixed on her with an unsettling intensity. He wasn't shivering, though the rain had soaked through his hoodie. Her eyes dropped to the cup. It was from Urban Grind, a cafe she frequented, but it was conspicuously light. "Is it empty?" she asked, the absurdity of the question hanging in the air. His smile widened, a flash of white in the dark. "Just take it. It's paid for." Driven by a desire to just make him go away, she slid the chain off, opened the door just wide enough to take the tray, and quickly shut it. re-engaging the deadbolt and chain with fumbling fingers. She heard his footsteps retreat down her porch steps. She stood with her back against the door, holding the flimsy cardboard tray. The cup was indeed almost weightless. She peeled back the lid. The cup was empty. No coffee, no tea, not even a stray coffee ground. Just a small, neatly folded square of white paper at the bottom. Her hands began to tremble. She set the tray down on her entryway table and, with numb fingers, picked out the note and unfolded it. 3 words were printed in a generic, computer font style. "You're not alone." A wave of cold dread washed over her, so potent it made her dizzy. She stumbled to her phone, her fingers slipping on the screen as she pulled up the number for Urban Grind. It was late, but someone might be cleaning up. The line rang twice before a weary-sounding young woman answered. "Urban Grind." "Hi," Claire stammered, trying to keep her voice steady. I just had a delivery. A man brought a coffee to my house. I need to confirm who placed the order." "Ma'am, we stopped deliveries at 9 p.m. We don't have any open orders right now." "But he had your cup. He said it was from a Ms. Allen." "I'm sorry," the woman said, her voice laced with boredom. "Not malice. There's no record of that, and we don't have any delivery drivers on staff named—" "What was his name?" Claire's blood ran cold. She hadn't asked. He hadn't offered. I don't know." "Then I can't help you. Have a good night." The line went dead. Claire stood in the center of her living room, the phone clutched in her hand, the silence of the house suddenly screaming at her. "You're not alone." The words echoed in her mind. She rushed through the downstairs, checking the locks on the front door, the back door, the windows. Every bolt was thrown, every latch secured. She stood in her kitchen, her chest heaving, listening. The rain had stopped. The world outside was unnervingly quiet. Then, a sound cut through the silence, faint but unmistakable. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't at the front door. It was coming from behind her. It was a soft, polite knock on her kitchen window. The soft, polite knocking on the kitchen window froze the air in Claire's lungs. It was a sound that didn't belong, a violation of the quiet, post-rain night. For a heart-stopping second, she couldn't move, her body locked in a primal state of freeze. Then, adrenaline kicked in, hot and electric. She spun around, her eyes darting to the window over the sink. The blinds were closed. She saw nothing but the slats and her own pale, wide-eyed reflection staring back. A ghost in her own kitchen. Tap, tap, tap. It came again, a little harder this time. Not frantic, but insistent. It was the sound of someone who knew they had her attention. She backed away slowly, her socked feet silent on the tile, then turned and ran. She didn't stop to look out any other windows. She flew through the living room, up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, her only thought a single screaming mantra. Hannah. She burst into her daughter's room. Hannah was still asleep, one arm flung over her beloved stuffed unicorn, her chest rising and falling in a peaceful, untroubled rhythm. The sight was a painful contrast to the terror clawing at Claire's throat. She stood there, gasping, listening. The house was silent again. Then, the baby monitor on Hannah's dresser crackled to life. It wasn't the usual white noise. It was a voice, low and distorted by the cheap speaker, a man's whisper that seemed to coil through the room like smoke. Hannah. The name wasn't shouted. It was breathed, an intimate, possessive sound that was more terrifying than any scream. He knew her name. He was using the monitor. Claire's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. She snatched the parent unit from the charger, her fingers trembling so violently she could barely press the buttons. She dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? A calm, female voice answered. There's someone in my house, Claire whispered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. Or outside. I don't know, he knocked on my window. He just whispered my daughter's name over the baby monitor. The dispatcher kept her calm. Okay, Claire, I need you to stay on the line with me. Are you and your daughter in a safe location? We're in her bedroom. The door is locked. Good. A patrol unit is on its way. They'll be there in just a few minutes. Can you hear anything now? Claire listened, her ear pressed against Hannah's bedroom door. The house was a tomb. Then a new sound, a soft, rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape from downstairs. It was the sound of something being dragged slowly across the back door. Then, the faintest metallic jiggle of the doorknob. He's at the back door, she hissed into the phone. He's trying to get in. The officers are almost there, Claire. Just stay quiet and stay where you are. She hung up, unable to speak anymore. She had to get Hannah somewhere safer. The closet. She gently lifted her sleeping daughter, unicorn and all, and carried her to the walk-in closet, settling her deep in the back, behind a pile of winter coats. Hannah murmured in her sleep, but didn't wake. Claire kissed her forehead, her tears falling on her daughter's hair, then closed the closet door, leaving it open just a crack. She stood guard by Hannah's bedroom door, a baseball bat she'd taken from the garage, held in her white-knuckled grip, listening to the silence. The scraping had stopped. The jiggling had stopped. Minutes later, the glorious blaring whoop of a police siren cut through the night, followed by the crunch of tires on her wet driveway. Blue and red lights painted swirling patterns on Hannah's walls. Claire nearly collapsed with relief. She flew downstairs and threw open the front door for the two officers. They were thorough. They checked the entire house, their heavy boots a comforting sound of authority. They found nothing. No forced entry. No one in the backyard. But outside, under Hannah's window, one of the officers pointed his flashlight at the soft, rain-soaked earth. There, clear as day, were a set of fresh, deep boot prints. They led from the fence line right up to the foundation directly beneath her daughter's room, and then back the way they came. The police filed a report. They told her it was likely a prank that had gone too far, maybe a disgruntled student. They promised to increase patrols in the neighborhood. Their words were meant to be comforting, but they felt hollow. They hadn't heard the whisper. They hadn't felt the intimate malice in that single spoken name. The next day was a blur of exhaustion and jumpy nerves. She called in sick to work. She had all the locks rekeyed. She bought stronger deadbolts and motion sensor lights for the backyard. Hannah, blissfully unaware, colored at the kitchen table. As the second night fell, the fear began to recede, replaced by a weary, cautious hope. The police had scared him off. It was over. She'd overreacted. She told herself this story until she almost believed it, clinging to the normalcy of putting Hannah to bed, of reading a story, of the quiet that followed. She slept deeply that night, her body and mind succumbing to the exhaustion of the previous 24 hours. She woke to a smell. It was rich, dark, and achingly familiar. The smell of freshly brewed coffee. Her eyes snapped open. The digital clock read 5:17 a.m. The house was silent. She was alone. She hadn't set the coffee maker. A cold dread, deeper and more profound than any she had felt before, seeped into her bones. She slid out of bed, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She crept down the stairs, each step a silent prayer that she was dreaming. The kitchen light was off, but the glow from the street lamp outside filtered through the window. And there, on the center of the clean counter, sat a single paper cup from Urban Grind. A plume of steam rose from the sip hole in the lid. The cup was full. The kitchen was empty. The steam from the paper cup curled in the dim kitchen light, a languid, taunting serpent. It was the most mundane of objects, a sight she had greeted thousands of mornings, now transformed into a totem of pure violation. The rich, aromatic smell, which usually promised comfort and alertness, now clawed at the back of her throat, threatening to make her gag. He had been here, inside her house, while she slept. Her first instinct was to scream, to sweep the cup from the counter and watch the scalding liquid paint the walls. But a deeper, colder instinct took over. Silence. Her eyes darted around the kitchen, then towards the living room. Her ears straining for any sound that didn't belong to the house's own settling bones. There was nothing, just the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic thudding of her own heart. Hannah. The thought was a bolt of lightning. She turned and ran back up the stairs, her bare feet slapping against the wood, her breath coming in ragged, silent sobs. She didn't stop to check any other rooms. She burst into Hannah's room, her eyes flying to the bed. Her daughter was there, still asleep, her stuffed unicorn clutched tightly. Relief, sharp and painful, made her legs weak. She crossed the room in 3 strides and locked the door, the click of the bolt a fragile shield against the impossible. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand, her fingers fumbling over the screen. The 911 operator's voice was a calm, digital anchor in the swirling chaos of her terror. 911, what's your emergency? He's inside my house, Claire whispered, her voice cracking. She pressed the phone so hard against her ear it hurt. He was in my kitchen. He left a cup of coffee. From the place I go to, Urban Grind. He was just in here. Okay, ma'am. I have your address. Units are on their way. Are you and your child in a secure location? We're in my bedroom. The door is locked. She slid down the door to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, making herself small. The baseball bat from the night before lay useless by the bed, a symbol of a defense that was already obsolete. Stay on the line with me. Can you hear anything? Claire held her breath, listening. The house was a vacuum of sound. Then it came. A soft, low humming from downstairs. It was tuneless, casual, the sound of a man puttering in his own home. Her blood turned to ice. The humming grew slightly louder, accompanied by the creak of a floorboard on the staircase. He was coming up. He's on the stairs, she breathed into the phone, the words barely audible. The humming stopped at the top of the landing. She could picture him there, standing in the hallway, deciding. A soft, muttering voice followed, a conversational tone that was more terrifying than any threat. Missed you at Urban Grind this morning, Claire. Got your usual anyway. Dark roast, 1 sugar. A pause. A mother should have her coffee. Her hand flew to her mouth. He knew her name. He knew her order. He was talking to her as if they were acquaintances who had simply missed each other. This wasn't a random break-in. It was a conversation he was having, one-sided and intimate. She heard his footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving down the hall. He paused outside Hannah's door. Claire's heart stopped. She heard the faintest snick of the doorknob turning, then a soft, disappointed sigh. The footsteps moved on, past the bathroom, closer. Then they stopped right outside her door. She could see them now, the toes of a pair of heavy, dark work boots, visible in the half-inch gap beneath the door. He stood there, silent. She could feel his presence, a cold pressure against the wood. The dispatcher was saying something in her ear, but the words were a distant buzz. All of her existence was focused on those 2 boots and the man standing in them. She heard a soft, wet slosh. Then, a gentle thud as something was set down on the hallway floorboards, just outside her door. The boots didn't move. He was waiting, listening just as she was. In the distance, so faint it was almost imagined, came the wail of a siren. It grew, a beautiful, rising promise of salvation. The boots shifted. She heard a low, almost amused chuckle. Next time then, the man whispered, his voice clear and horribly close through the door. His footsteps retreated, swift and sure this time, moving back down the hall and descending the stairs. The sound of the back door opening and closing with a quiet, final click echoed through the silent house. "He's gone out the back," Claire said, her voice returning in a rush. "He just left." The sirens were loud now, right outside. Blue and red lights flashed through the gaps in the blinds. She heard car doors slam, the crackle of a police radio, and then the heavy, authoritative pounding on the front door. "Police! Open up!" She scrambled to her feet, her legs trembling, and unlocked her bedroom door. She didn't look at the object he'd left as she rushed past it, flying down the stairs to let the officers in. 2 uniformed men stood there, their faces grim and alert. "He was just here," she gasped, pointing a shaking hand towards the back of the house. He went out of the back door. He was upstairs. One officer immediately moved through the kitchen and into the backyard, his flashlight beam cutting through the dawn gloom. The other stayed with her, his hand resting on his weapon. "Show me," he said. She led him back upstairs, her heart still hammering. The hallway was empty, but there, placed neatly in the center of the worn runner, was another paper cup from Urban Grind. A plume of steam, delicate and obscene, still rose from it. The officer approached it cautiously, nudging it with his boot. He looked at her, his professional mask slipping for a moment to reveal a flicker of unease. They did a full sweep. The house was empty, just as it had been the night before. The back door was unlocked, but showed no signs of forced entry. The officer who had checked the backyard came back in, shaking his head. "No one out there. The gate's open. He's in the wind." It was the same story, but infinitely worse. The boot prints under the window had been a threat from the outside. The coffee on the counter was a violation. But this was a delivery, a calling card left at the threshold of her final sanctuary. He had stood right there, on the other side of the door, and left her a gift while she cowered, listening to the promise of his return. That was the breaking point. Claire didn't wait for the police to finish their report. She packed a single bag for herself and Hannah, who was now awake and confused, asking why the police were back. They left that same hour, driving to a generic, anonymous hotel on the other side of the city. She never spent another night in the house. Within a week, she had broken her lease, citing a family emergency. The landlord, having heard the rumors, didn't put up a fight. She found a small, secure apartment in a high-rise building with a doorman and cameras in the lobby. She moved in with the boxes she never fully unpacked, her nerves still frayed, jumping at every unexpected sound. Months passed. The sharp edge of the terror began to dull, worn down by the relentless routine of school and work and the blessed, boring anonymity of the new neighborhood. She started to believe, in fleeting moments during the bright light of day, that it was over. He had been a ghost tied to that house, and she had escaped him. Then, a small square parcel arrived in her mailbox. There was no return address, just her name and the new apartment number printed in a neat, blocky font. Her blood ran cold. Only a handful of people knew this address. With trembling hands, she carried it upstairs, setting it on the kitchen counter as if it were a live explosive. She used a pair of scissors to slit the tape, her breath held. Inside, nestled in a bed of crinkled brown packing paper, was a familiar paper cup from Urban Grind. It was cold to the touch. Taped to its side was a small, plain white card. In the same neat, blocky print as the address label, it read, "See you soon, Ms. Allen." She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply walked to the sink, poured the cold, stale coffee down the drain, and dropped the cup and the card into the trash. Then she scrubbed her hands until the skin was raw. The police were called, of course. A detective took notes, his expression professionally sympathetic, but ultimately helpless. The parcel was untraceable. It was just a cup and a card. There were no threats, no overt menaces, just a promise. I stopped drinking coffee after that. I still can't stand the smell. It doesn't remind me of wakefulness or comfort. It smells of violation. It smells of him, moving through the quiet of my home. A ghost who knew my name and my order. A man who believed a mother should have her coffee and who promised with a whisper and a steam-filled cup that he was never truly gone. The smell of disinfectant and quiet despair had clung to Isabella's scrubs all week. It was a scent she could never fully wash away, a ghost of the oncology ward's hushed halls and the slow, painful beep of monitors marking a patient's final hours. It was a scent that followed her into her dreams, mingling with the image of an empty side of the bed and a text message that read, "I need space, Izzy. It's not you, it's me." After a week like that, the bass thumping through the floor of Aura wasn't just music. It was an exorcism. The strobing neon lights, electric blue and hot pink, scorched the lingering hospital shadows from her retinas. On the crowded dance floor, she was no longer Nurse Isabella, bearer of bad news and bedpans. She was just a body in motion, anonymous and free, the weight of her stethoscope replaced by the slick of sweat on her skin. "You see him? 3 o'clock, leather jacket," Sophia shouted into her ear, her voice cutting through the synth pop beat. Isabella followed her best friend's discreet nod. A man was leaning against the bar, watching the dance floor with a lazy, appraising confidence. He was handsome, in a clean-cut investment banker way, but the leather jacket added a layer of intriguing contradiction. Next to him was another man, taller, with a quiet intensity, his gaze already fixed on them. "Forget it, Soph. I'm just here to dance," Isabella yelled back, forcing a smile. Her heart wasn't in it. It felt like a bruised fruit, still pulpy and tender from David's departure. "No, you're not. You're here to live," Sophia countered her, grabbing her hand and pulling her through the throng of bodies towards the bar. "And living requires talking to hot men who are very clearly interested." Before Isabella could protest, they were there, the press of the crowd funneling them right into the space beside the two men. The one in the leather jacket, Ethan, turned and offered a brilliant practiced smile. "Ladies, fighting your way through the jungle?" His voice was smooth, a low rumble that carried easily over the music. "Something like that," Sophia laughed, effortlessly slipping into the flirtation. "We needed reinforcements." The taller man, Cole, gave a slow, deliberate nod. His eyes, a pale, almost unnerving blue, lingered on Isabella. "Reinforcements we can provide. What are you drinking?" Isabella felt a familiar shield click into place. When the world felt too sharp, too real, she'd donned the persona of Ditzy Izzy, a character who was bubbly, uncomplicated, and impossible to hurt. It was a defense mechanism forged in high school and perfected in the face of grieving families. "Ooh, something fruity," she chirped, her voice pitching higher. "Something that doesn't taste like real life. Am I right?" She let out a light, airy laugh that felt foreign in her own throat. Ethan's smile widened. A woman who knows what she wants. I like that, he flagged down the bartender. 2 palomas for the ladies, and a bourbon for me. Cole? Water, Cole said, his voice quiet but firm. His intense gaze never left Isabella. Someone's got to keep a clear head. The comment sent a tiny, almost imperceptible shiver down her spine, but she buried it under another giggle. A responsible adult. How refreshing. Ethan insisted on paying, waving away Sophia's credit card with a charming, dismissive gesture. Please, allow me. It's not every night we get rescued from our own boring conversation by the 2 most beautiful women in the room. As the bartender made their drinks, Isabella watched the 2 men from the corner of her eye. They were a study in contrasts. Ethan was all easy smiles and expansive gestures, the charismatic front man. Cole was the silent partner, watchful, calculating. She saw Ethan lean in, his lips close to Cole's ear, whispering something. Cole's expression just didn't change, but he gave a single sharp nod. It was probably nothing. Just guy talk. But the gesture felt proprietary, like they were discussing a business acquisition. The drinks arrived. The palomas were a vibrant, sunny yellow in the highball glasses, a slice of grapefruit perched on the rim. They looked perfect. To new friends, Ethan said, raising his glass. They clinked glasses. Isabella took a sip. It was tart, sweet, and strong. Too strong? She was a nurse. She knew how to pace herself. But the week had been long, and the ditzy Izzy act required liquid courage. She drank deeply, feeling the tequila burn a welcome path down her throat, numbing the edges of her heartache. After a few minutes of easy banter, mostly led by Sophia and Ethan, Isabella felt the 2 margaritas she'd had earlier make their presence known. Bathroom break, she announced. Don't let my drink get lonely. Sophia waved her off, already deep in a debate with Ethan about the best pizza in Chicago. The ladies' room was a haven of relative quiet, the bass muted to a dull throb. She splashed cold water on her face, staring at her reflection in the smudged mirror. The ditzy Izzy mask was slipping, revealing the exhausted, sad woman beneath. What are you doing? She asked her reflection. This isn't you. But the alternative, going home to her silent, empty apartment, was worse. She took a few deep breaths, reapplied her lip gloss, and headed back out, weaving through the crowd. When she returned to their spot at the bar, the atmosphere had shifted. The easy, flirtatious energy was gone. Ethan and Cole were standing closer together, their postures stiff. They stopped talking the moment she approached, their smiles flashing back on a half-second too late. They were rehearsed, like actors who had forgotten their lines for a moment, before snapping back into character. There she is, Ethan said, his voice a little too loud, a little too hearty. We were just about to send a search party. It's a jungle in there, Isabella replied, falling back into her act, but the rhythm felt off now. The music was too loud, the lights too strobe-like. Her head was beginning to feel fuzzy, a thick cotton wool sensation that wasn't entirely from the alcohol. She'd only had 1.5 drinks. She shouldn't feel this. Detached. "We got you a fresh one," Cole said, his quiet voice cutting through her thoughts. He pushed a new glass towards her. "Yours was getting warm." It was another Paloma, but this one was different. She looked at it, then at the nearly full glass she'd left behind, which was now gone. This new drink was in a different, slightly narrower glass. And the color was wrong. It wasn't the pale, natural yellow of grapefruit juice and tequila. It was a bright, almost neon yellow, the color of a highlighter pen. The texture, too, was off. It wasn't clear with ice. It was slushy, opaque, like a frozen cocktail that had been hastily blended and was now beginning to melt. Her nursing brain, the part she'd been trying to silence all night, snapped to attention. Dyed, pre-mixed, easier to disguise a taste. Ethan was watching her, his charming smile firmly in place, but his eyes were sharp, assessing her reaction. Cole's intense blue gaze was a physical pressure. "Oh, you didn't have to do that," Ditzy Izzy said, the words automatic. "It's no trouble," Ethan said smoothly. "You looked like you were enjoying it." Isabella's eyes darted to Sophia, who was already lifting her own fresh, similarly neon yellow drink to her lips, laughing at something Cole had said. A cold clarity cut through the tequila-fueled haze, the whispered conversation, the shifted mood, the water Cole was drinking, the rehearsed smiles, the missing original drink, replaced by this bright, slushy imposter. It wasn't a guess. It wasn't a paranoid suspicion. It was a clinical, horrifying certainty, born from a career of observing minute details and connecting symptoms to a diagnosis. They drugged our drinks. The idea landed, cold and final, in the center of her soul. The neon yellow drink sat on the bar between them, a vile, slushy accusation. The bass of the music seemed to sync with the frantic hammering of Isabella's heart. They drugged our drinks. The thought was no longer a silent alarm in her mind. It was a scream that reverberated in her bones, cold and absolute. Her nursing training had taught her to recognize the signs of toxidromes, the slurred speech, the pinpoint pupils, the loss of coordination. But this was a lesson in premeditation, in the calm, smiling face of predation. She had seconds, maybe one. Sophia was already taking a sip from her own bright glass, her trust in their new friends tragically complete. Isabella's ditzy Izzy persona, once a flimsy shield, now but just her most potent weapon. She had to wield it perfectly. "Ooh, a fresh one," she chirped, her voice a masterclass in airheaded delight. She picked up the suspect glass, making a show of admiring its color. "It's so electric. It looks like it should glow in the dark." Ethan's watchful eyes softened slightly, his charming mask reaffirmed by her performance. "Only the best for you ladies." She brought the glass close to her lips, then paused, lowering it with a theatrical pout. "You know, this is a lot of tequila for a little girl like me." She fluttered her eyelashes, turning her gaze to Ethan's half-finished bourbon. "That looks much more Grown up. A man's drink. Ethan chuckled, a low, condescending sound. Trust me, sweetheart. You stick with the pretty one. This'll put hair on your chest. Oh, I'm sure you can handle a girl's drink, she purred, leaning into the persona, her voice dripping with playful challenge. What's the matter, big guy? Afraid of a little grapefruit? It was a dare, framed in the language of flirtation. She saw the flicker in his eyes. Male pride stung. Cole watched, silent and unnerving as ever. Come on, Isabella coaxed, her smile never wavering even as her stomach churned with terror. A swap, for fun. I want to see if you can even taste the difference. She extended the neon yellow glass towards him, her hand steady through sheer force of will. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought he'd refuse. Then, with a roll of his eyes and a smirk aimed at Cole, Ethan took it. If it makes you happy. He pushed his bourbon towards her. It does, she trilled, grabbing the heavy rocks glass. The amber liquid within was a known quantity, a sanctuary. She pretended to take a large, unladylike gulp, the bourbon barely wetting her lips. The act was the thing. Ethan, playing his part in this deadly pantomime, raised the neon drink in a mock toast. To new friends. He took a long, definitive swallow. Cole, after a moment's hesitation, lifted his own water glass and drank. The next 15 minutes were an exercise in surreal horror. Isabella clung to the bourbon glass like a lifeline, pretending to sip while carefully pouring tiny amounts onto the sticky floor behind the bar rail. She kept up a constant stream of inane chatter, laughing too loudly at nothing, all while her clinical eye monitored her targets. The first sign was the slurring. It was Ethan who began to falter. He was in the middle of a story about a skiing trip, his words already beginning to drag, the consonants blending together. And then I hit the Black Diamond Run. He blinked, his eyes losing focus. Sophia, finally picking up on the shift, leaned into Isabella. Is he okay? He seems really drunk all of a sudden. Before Isabella could answer, Cole, who had been leaning against the bar for support, pushed himself upright. The movement was clumsy, uncoordinated. Need air, he mumbled, his voice thick. He took a step away from the bar, his legs buckling beneath him. He didn't collapse dramatically. He folded, like a marionette with its strings cut, slumping into a heap on the floor. A woman nearby screamed. Ethan stared down at his friend, his face a mask of confusion. Cole, get up, man. The words were a wet, incomprehensible slur. He tried to take a step and stumbled, catching himself hard on the bar. The bright yellow drink, still half full, sloshed over the rim and onto his leather jacket. Chaos erupted. The bartender, a burly man with a shaved head, was over the counter in an instant. Hey, what's going on here? I think they're sick, Isabella cried, her ditzy Izzy voice now layered with genuine panic. The bartender knelt beside Cole, checking his pulse. He looked up at Ethan, who was now swaying precariously, his eyes rolling back in his head. Then the bartender's gaze snapped to the two glasses on the bar, the neon slush in front of Ethan, and the identical one Sophia had been drinking from. His expression hardened into grim understanding. "Security!" he bellowed. He looked at Isabella and Sophia, his voice low and urgent. "Were you drinking with these guys? Did you drink from the—" Isabella pointed a trembling finger at the yellow glasses. "They bought those for us. We swapped drinks, just for a joke." The bartender's face was stony. "We had a report earlier. A guy at the end of the bar was messing with a couple of drinks that looked like that. Bright yellow, slushy. We thought we'd scared him off. We flagged them to watch for them." He shook his head in disgust as 2 large security guards arrived. "Looks like they got to them anyway. You two are lucky." The words should have been a comfort. They were anything but. They had been flagged. This wasn't an opportunistic crime. It was a targeted, planned assault that had very nearly succeeded. The next hour was a blur of flashing lights and official questions. Paramedics loaded the 2 incapacitated men onto gurneys. Police officers took their statements. Sophia, shaking and crying, clung to Isabella's arm. Isabella gave her statement in a calm, measured tone. The ditzy Izzy act finally discarded. She was Nurse Isabella now, a witness to a near tragedy. The officers were sympathetic. "You did the right thing swapping those drinks. You probably saved yourself and your friend from a very bad night." They were escorted to a ride share by a uniformed officer. The cool night air a shock after the club's stifling atmosphere. The false relief was a palpable thing. They were safe. They had won. The predators had been hoisted by their own petard. Sophia sobbed with relief in the back seat, repeating, "Oh my God, Izzy, you saved us. You saved us." Isabella nodded, patting her friend's back, but the cold knot of dread in her stomach hadn't dissolved. It had only tightened. The men's faces, their whispered conversation, Cole's intense, knowing gaze. It all felt unfinished. The ride share pulled away from the curb. In the relative quiet, Sophia fumbled for her phone to text her boyfriend they were safe. Isabella, her hand still trembling, reached for her own phone to silence it. The screen lit up. There was a new text message from an unknown number. Her blood, which had just begun to warm, froze solid in her veins. She opened it. The message was short, devoid of any identifying context, but its meaning was as clear and sharp as a scalpel. "Nice trick with the drink." The text message, "Nice trick with the drink," had been a ghost in her pocket for 3 weeks. She'd shown it to the police, who had noted it down with weary professionalism. The number was a disposable, untraceable burner. Ethan and Cole, upon being discharged from the hospital, had been arrested, but they'd lawyered up instantly and revealed nothing. The case, they told her, was weak. Without concrete proof of their intent beyond the bartender's testimony and the drugged drinks they themselves had consumed. It was a labyrinth of circumstantial evidence. Life had forced itself into a new, jagged shape. The sharp, clinical terror of that night had softened into a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety, a background radiation that poisoned everything. She went back to work on the oncology ward, where the controlled, predictable suffering was almost a relief. Here, the monsters had names like metastasis and prognosis, not Ethan and Cole. She found herself holding Patient's hands a little tighter, her empathy now laced with a visceral understanding of powerlessness. She stopped wearing the bright bodycon dresses she'd loved. They felt like a costume, inviting the wrong kind of attention. Now it was oversized sweaters and jeans, a uniform of invisibility. She avoided mirrors in public, hated the feeling of being a visible object in a space. Her laughter with Sophia had a new, brittle quality. Their girls' nights were now quiet dinners at home, the blinds drawn, the door double-locked. The world outside had been reclassified from a place of possibility to a landscape of potential threats. She tried to talk to her therapist about it, about the text. "It's the violation," she'd said, her voice flat. "It's knowing that even when you think you've won, even when you outsmarted them, they were still watching. They saw the whole play. The text was their way of letting me know my victory was an illusion they'd permitted." Her therapist called it hypervigilance, a classic trauma response. Isabella called it sanity. She was sitting at her kitchen table, scrolling through job listings in other cities. Seattle, Denver, anywhere that wasn't here, when the email arrived. It landed in her promotions folder with a soft ping. The sender was a jumble of letters and numbers, at freemail.com. The subject line was blank. Her first instinct, honed by the last few weeks, was to delete it. Spam. Phishing. It was nothing. But a cold finger of intuition traced a path down her spine. She opened it. There was no body text, no greeting, no signature. Just a single image embedded in the center of the white screen. It was a photo of her and Sophia, sitting at the bar in Aura. The angle was from behind and slightly to the right, as if taken from just over Sophia's shoulder. It was taken moments before the swap. She could see the back of Sophia's head, her own profile caught in a moment of forced, ditzy Izzy laughter. On the bar in front of them were their original, non-suspect drinks. Ethan's leather jacket was visible on the stool next to her, and Cole's intense figure was a blurry presence at the edge of the frame. It was a candid shot, an intimate one. It captured the last few seconds of their innocence. She stared, her breath trapped in her lungs, the world shrinking to the glow of her laptop screen. The details were excruciating. The way her hand was curled around her glass, the loose thread on the strap of Sophia's top, the neon light reflecting in the polished wood of the bar. The photographer had been close, intimately close. He'd been standing right behind them, a ghost in the crowd, capturing this moment before the trap was sprung. Her eyes, burning with unshed tears, dragged downwards to the caption below the photo. It was only 5 words. They were typed in a plain, unassuming font, but they struck her with the force of a physical blow. "You almost didn't make it home." A sound escaped her, a choked gasp that it was part sob, part vomit. She slammed the laptop shut, but the image was seared onto the back of her eyelids. The photo wasn't a threat of future violence. It was something far more insidious. It was a receipt, a trophy. It was a reminder that their escape had not been a clean one, that their safety was, and always had been, an illusion. The men in the photo were just the actors. The director, the one holding the camera, was still out there. He had watched the entire performance, their fear, their cleverness, their relief, and he had documented it. This was the true climax. Not a chase, not a physical struggle, but this silent, psychological detonation in her quiet kitchen. This was the confrontation with the formless, invisible evil of human intent. It wasn't a monster you could fight with a baseball bat or outrun in a dark alley. It was a presence, a gaze that could find you anywhere, a voice that could whisper from a blocked number, an eye that could capture you in a moment of vulnerability and hold you there, forever. She didn't call the police. What would she say? They sent me a picture from the night of the crime. It proved nothing and everything all at once. It was a message meant only for her, a shared secret between predator and prey. She never found another nursing job. The empathy that had once been her greatest strength had been cauterized by fear. How could she hold space for another person's suffering when her own psyche had been hollowed out? She moved to a small town in Oregon 6 months later. She works remotely now, doing medical coding, a job that requires no human touch. She lives in a small house with a large dog. She is safe. She is functional. But the world is forever fractured. Every crowd is a hiding place for a camera. Every stranger's glance lasts a second too long. The memory is not a story she tells. It's a cell she lives inside. Sometimes, when I go out, I still order 2 drinks. One for me, one for whoever's watching.